remarks. Again, Jeff Zagar, I'm the operations manager at the Development Center. I promise not to ask you a bunch of questions. I'll let you ask me the questions, but I do have one. Just curiosity, who here has been through an occupancy process before, or maybe pursuing one in the future, starting a new business? Is that anybody in the audience that's part of it? Okay, terrific. So that helps. Great, I will get into the formal presentation I have, and then we'll have a chance at the end for questions, comments, whatever it may be on it. So. Let's see my mouse. Thanks for your patience. All right, so occupancy. Occupancy means a lot of things to a lot of different people. This session today is kind of a tie between a couple other sessions that have happened. If you've been in any of the lunch and learns, they've had some background on other city approval processes, licenses, zoning approvals. There was a session on the Board of Zoning Appeals process itself, some background on funding for development, things along that line. The next series is going to be more specific to building code. Occupancy touches on a lot of different processes, a lot of different concerns. So. Again, I'm Jeff Zagar. I'm the Development Center Operations Manager. I was appointed or promoted to that position within the last 4 months. My history with the city, I started in 1994. I came into the city as a inspector. Did a year of fire inspections, moved into some construction inspections, so I had some experience with the occupancy process from the field end of things. I then got into the plan examination function. Plan examiners are the primary movers of the process early on as to who you would meet with to start an occupancy application. I have about 19 years experience doing plan examination. Also left the city for a couple years, went into private industry, had some opportunities to never apply for an occupancy myself, but I did develop plans, submit to different municipalities for building permits, for zoning approvals. Just never had a chance to go through an occupancy with a different community. So a little bit of background on the development center itself. In a typical year, we process probably 2,400 to 2,500 occupancy applications. That is distributed amongst probably 7 reviewers on a regular basis. So each individual, Alex is one of them, gets his hands into over 300 occupancy applications on a yearly basis. Some of those are very streamlined, quick and easy review and approval. Some of them are more complicated. All of them involve interaction with you, the applicant, trying to understand how we can help you get your business going, what your business entails, and the best way to make it through the city processes. So.
And before Jeff goes on, have the older men and women speak.
Good afternoon. I'm Alderwoman Milena A. Connors, and I'm joined by my colleagues.
What's up, Edis?
Us and Alderman Khalif Rainey worked with DCD, DNS, and LIST in order to create this Lunch and Learn series. Our goal is just to make sure that those interested have as much information as possible about city processes so that you can help to redevelop the entire city, all of our neighborhoods. So I hope that you all take notes, learn, ask questions, and also get to know some of the various city people that work with these departments that you will need approvals from as you move forward in helping us redevelop the city. So I thank you all for being here, and a special thank you to DNS, DCD, and LIST for partnering with us to make sure that this information is shared. Also at the end there's a survey, so hopefully you give us feedback on how to make these even better for the future or more information and maybe you should cover.
Yeah, I always like to thank all the partners involved. Thank you for being here. One of the most important takeaways for me is that we're all committed to making sure that we kind of change some of the misnomers and stereotypes about the city and that we're difficult to do business with, because we're committed to removing as much of that as we can And it happens because we're going to get you in front of people, you're going to make connections, you're going to meet plan examiners, people who handle real estate at DCD. You've got some valuable partners back there, and Dwayne Edwards and Matt Hazley, Matt Banier's here. And so you need to connect you with these folks because we want to make it easy to do business. And we can't emphasize enough the relationship building and how important that is. Because when those doors are open, you get answers, you can plan better, understand the process, and it always isn't easy, but we want you engaged and we appreciate you being here and really participating. So we're committed to that, and not only do we want you to fill out the surveys about what can make these lunch and learn better, but even when we're dealing with the city, we want to hear your suggestions on how we can improve the way we're talking to one another and decisions that we're making and how we're interacting, because it always isn't easy. And I wait in line like everyone else at the development center to get a permit. Even for the simplest thing as getting a pergola, I went 3 times before I actually pulled the permit, which I still haven't built. But it was asking questions and figuring out what my options are in doing that, and that's exactly what we want you to do. So thank you for being here. Thank everyone, and please take advantage.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Don't forget to sit pop, please. Participate in something this week.
Thank you. Before I forget, I'd also like to extend a thank you to Alex Walker for coordinating this series, producing this series. He's been a great driver of the whole thing. So, a lot of questions surround occupancy. People have their own understanding of what an occupancy application, an occupancy certificate process should be or is. I'm hoping to address your questions on that, the who, what, when, where, whys. Starting with, what exactly is occupancy itself? We talk about this, a certificate for it. Well, what do we mean by occupancy? And then when we define that, what type of certificates, processes are out there for those various uses? Who needs an occupancy? Does everybody, no matter where? Do you need one at your house? Do you need it for every business, every portion of a business? Why in the world do I need the city to approve what I'm doing? Why do I have to go through a city approval process? And then, assuming I'm making it through this, when exactly do I need the certificate? If I'm looking for a business, looking at various locations, is that the right time to search this out and approach the city for a certificate? Is it before I get started? Is it once I've been there and established and I'm comfortable with my space? When exactly do I need to go through this process? And finding out that I do and knowing when I'm going to go through this, how then and where do I go? How do I make it through the application process, any other approval processes that are out there? And finally, where can I find more information? I'll give you some of our website links, other resources to use to help clarify the process for you. Strangely, our building code and our zoning code don't actually have a formal definition of occupancy. We have lots of language around the term. When our codes don't specifically define something, we rely on dictionary definitions. One that's out there from Merriam-Webster's Law Dictionary has a number of different iterations of it. Fact, condition, holding, possessing, residing in or on something. The act or taking or having possession, something like abandoned property to acquire its ownership. The fact or condition of being occupied, and finally the use to which a property is put. Designed for industrial occupancy is their example. Number 4 is really the one that we look at most closely. How are you going to use the space? Is this going to be a meeting room like this? Is it going to be a city hall building? Is it going to be a repair garage? What's going to happen? What functions are going to take place within that space? Couple different versions of occupancy in this slide. This is the Occupy Wall Street movement, editorial cartoon that came out for that with a gentleman. Part of that Occupy movement going to a portable toilet, which itself was occupied. So lots of different versions and situations on that. The building code and the zoning code both come into play on occupancies. I'll start with the building code aspect of this. The city of Milwaukee, in its own building and zoning code, adopts a couple different wider, broader codes. One of them being the Uniform Dwelling Code published by the state of Wisconsin, which is available out there online, also in booklet format. They've gone away from some of these, but this is a set of rules that applies to your home, to a residence, to something that is primarily 1 or 2 family. There's a couple other exceptions that are wrapped into this code. Portions of a bed and breakfast. You have an existing home and you want to move into different portions of it. A bed and breakfast, while it seems like a commercial enterprise, they allow it to follow some of the rules that are in 1 or 2 family home codes. Excuse me. There's other uses that are somewhat similar where it's expanding beyond just your family being in a place, what they call a CBRF, a community-based residential facility, group homes, group foster homes for children, adult family homes, family daycare homes are another use that can fall within the 1 and 2 family set of rules. Family daycare home is, I know my neighbor down the block, she or he is taking care of 5 to 6 kids while they're home. It's not a daycare center, it's a family daycare home. And then one other kind of a unique situation is we have a lot of corner store buildings, mixed commercial buildings in the city of Milwaukee. Many of them were developed with a residence above a storefront. Whether it was going to be the bakery, whatever it was going to be, that owner would live above the store, behind the store. The portion that is used just as a residence is actually subject to the rules in that 1 and 2 family building code. We have the 1 and 2 family, and then we have the Wisconsin Commercial Building Code, which applies basically to everything else. Office buildings, industrial buildings, manufacturing facilities, some residential, the group residential, multifamily. That's a little bit larger volume of codes, as you're going to see. The state actually uses the international codes, which has one set of books that deals with new commercial buildings and new additions, another one that deals with the existing buildings that are out there. For most of our occupancy applications, this existing building code is the tool we go to quite often. If we wanted to change, say, City Hall to being an existing historically designated building, to go from government office to, boy, this would make a great nightclub or a set of apartments or whatever it may be, that existing building code rules come into play. They have a lot of forgiveness for existing conditions, but there's still rules there that you have to follow on some of that for life safety purposes. These Wisconsin building codes that we adopt, they're intended to be uniform across the state. So if you're coming to Milwaukee to establish a small retail store, the rules from a building code perspective should be the same as you're going to find in Waukesha or Sheboygan or wherever you go throughout the state. There's very, very limited exceptions to that code. So most communities, I think all communities, are subject to compliance with that. You might find people that apply it differently or interpret it differently. You're always going to run into that anytime you have a set of regulations. But the intent is to have this set of rules uniform everywhere you go in the state of Wisconsin. In the building code, the commercial building code, we start looking at what is occupancy, what is use. The commercial building code breaks it into categories based on what's happening in the space. There's 10 different ones that they apply. Assembly is something like a nightclub, a tavern, a church, something where you have a large group of people congregating. Business is, we're all familiar with a business use, office buildings, et cetera. Some of the small studio type spaces can fall into this category. It's kind of a catch-all category. If you really don't fit into something else, the business type rules apply. Educational would be schools, it would be some of the daycare centers that are out there. Factory and industrial, high hazard. High hazard gets into things that go boom. Generally, if you have some corrosive, if you have some type of explosive hazard, some special fire hazard, you're going to have rules that apply to that. The residential in this case would be multifamily buildings, some of the larger group facilities. So when we start off taking a look at this, we're trying to figure out, okay, we understand what your business is going to entail. Tell us kind of your description of it. We then have to categorize it in one of these areas, and that's going to drive things forward from a building code analysis. We also have to look at the zoning code. Occupancies have the building component, the life safety. They have the zoning, which is really more of a planning, city development type of concern. It also ties into welfare. Do we these days want to have people necessarily living next to the hazardous factory that was there as things were developed historically? There's a little bit more of a comprehensive plan these days. Our zoning code does not define it, but it talks about it's unlawful to occupy, use any building, structure, or premise unless you have a certificate of occupancy issued by the Commissioner of Neighborhood Services. And it also goes on to say that you need a separate certificate for each use or occupancy as specified in this chapter. So what the zoning chapter does has its own definitions separate from the building code. So we're going to have a number of different use categories. We had about 10 in the building code. Here we have 16 different categories in the zoning code. And each of these have multiple uses within them. So if I come in and I'm going to do a daycare center, we're going to take a look and it's going to be defined under the educational group of uses. General service uses are personal service, a tattoo shop, something where something is being performed for an individual. Motor vehicle uses include parking lots, dealerships, et cetera. So we've got to take a look, classify it in zoning, classify it in building code. The way they classify and delineate these things is in the zoning code, you'll see a series of use tables. So the plan reviewer is going to, thank you, Alex, refer to these use tables. There's a set of these developed for each type of zoning district within the code. Some areas are zoned for residential uses. Some areas are primarily commercial, industrial. Some areas are plan development where an applicant has gone through and chosen to have a specific set of rules. So you'll start seeing those groups you mentioned, the educational, and within each group, there's a breakdown of other uses that are defined within the code. So each of those has a specific definition. Our job is to try and pinpoint you into one of those classifications. You know, what are you most similar to? Are you a bank or financial institution, or do you really fall into a payday loan agency? So different set of rules over the years for each of those, different permissions for them. So this is for commercial districts, which you'll find along most of the commercial streets in Milwaukee. In commercial districts, we have, I believe it's 8 different types of commercial districts, depending on when it was developed, how dense it is, what is the intended set of uses that they want to see in that area. And then we have a bunch of letters in this chart. And the letters are key as to telling you how you're going to be able to move forward with this use in that area. What you'll see on it is we classify all these different uses, we define the uses, and then we have a Y, an L, an S, and an N. A Y is a great thing to see as an applicant. It's a permitted use. So if I come in and I am an office in an area that allows office, it should be a permitted use. It's a matter of right. You know, you don't have to go through any additional zoning approvals typically. There's another category that's the next step below as far as streamline of process, which is a limited use. So if you see an L in there, what that intends to do is direct you to a set of standards that if you meet those standards, you become a permitted use. If you do not meet them, you become either a special use or a use variance, something that needs additional scrutiny because of some impact on the neighborhood. An example of something like that would be an hourly restriction. Say we allow restaurants in some area, more typically a retail sales. It might say you can't operate between midnight and 5 in the morning or something. But if you intend to be 24 hours, not to say you can't do that, but you need to go through a process to show that that's the right fit for that neighborhood. The special use triggers Board of Zoning processes. Basically a special use, some communities call this a conditional use. It means that generally it is acceptable, but because of some concerns potentially for the neighborhood, they want to take a look a little further, have a public hearing type of process involved. Examples of these would be repair shops, auto repair shops, motor vehicle filling stations, a lot of them that have an impact, whether it's traffic, whether it's nuisances that it generates, with littering, whatever it may be, hours, appearances, things that, okay, but let's take a look, make sure this really fits with our planning. And then if you run into an N in the table, that's just something that is prohibited. If you want to go to a residential district and you're going to propose a hazardous material storage facility, you're going to see a big bold N there. Last thing we want is a facility plopped down in the middle of a residential neighborhood with the special hazards that brings. There's another category of uses which are deemed accessory uses. These are typically limited, kind of an ancillary nature, something that is defined both in the building code and the zoning code. Generally, it's going to have a 10% of your floor area restriction. If you get into the building code, you come in and say, I'm going to be a factory, I'm going to be a brewery, whatever it is, but I'm also going to have a small gift shop, a retail function. The gift shop is kind of lumped into the overall operation of the factory, so we don't have to treat it just special for this little mercantile set of rules. It's going to stay under the factory rules. In the zoning code, a very typical situation is I have a salon, which is deemed a personal service use, but I also want to sell some product there. As long as you kind of keep that product to that 10% figure, it doesn't trigger all of a sudden you're analyzed as a retail use. You stay in that personal service type of use, which can be beneficial in cases there are districts that might not permit the one or need special approval for one use. But if it's just this subset of the overall use, it can be allowable. Residential districts, there's standards, I believe, for accessory uses on vehicle repair. You can work on your own car, but don't start a shop where you're bringing everybody else's car to you. So that comes into play occasionally. We're not going to necessarily, while the one table did say we need an occupancy certificate separate for each of these uses, there are cases where some of it gets wrapped into the overall occupancy. So now that we're down that path, what exactly is this approval of my occupancy called? You'll see a lot of terms thrown around out there. In the city, we generally say you have an occupancy certificate. Some people turn it around, certificate of occupancy. Previously, we had something called a zoning certificate, which was probably the simplest mechanism. If I had a store, it was still going to be a store, just operated by somebody else. It was driven by the inspection process. Not much is changing. We're going to issue a certificate that says, yes, it's still permitted out there. Some communities use a zoning permit term. There are some, not necessarily in Wisconsin, but in other states that don't require an occupancy, but they might still want you to get a zoning permit. It acts very similarly to occupancy, just doesn't necessarily have the building code proponent of it. People abbreviate it CO for certificate of occupancy, COO, CLO. There's different versions. There's a name change occupancy. I have Stan's shoe shop. Now it's going to be Stan's Shoes and Boots, but it's still me operating this business. You have a conditional occupancy, temporary occupancies. We'll get into those in depth in a while. There's just mechanisms to get you going before the full thing is approved. And there's something called a home occupation. People starting a business in their home. I'm going to start running my books for my office. I don't have a full-blown office, but I need to keep my books somewhere. There's allowances to do some of that out of your home. It is fairly limited, but we do have a process for what's known as a home occupation. And there are other agencies within the city that do their own type of occupancy. Our DPW, the Public Works Department, has occupancy for occupying a portion of the street or the sidewalk. The construction site across the way for BMO Harris blocks off a traffic lane for construction of their crane. They need an occupancy permit from DPW to do that short-term occupancy of the traffic lane. Public Works also has what's known as a special privilege, which is kind of a long-term version of an occupancy. If you start your business and you find out that, or you just desire to put a ramp in for accessibility, but you don't have room on your own property, there are circumstances that may allow you to put that ramp into the sidewalk area, possibly. But if it exceeds certain limits, then DPW has kind of this long-term approval called a special privilege to allow that to be there. Sidewalk dining, sidewalk cafes, that's very popular these days. The restaurants want to have some seating out on the sidewalk area, which is actually public land. They do a seasonal permit through that. It ties closely with the occupancy, but it's a different beast. And then there's special events. Harley coming into town, they may block off some streets, et cetera, and want approval to do some of that. So, what does an occupancy look like itself? This is generally what you get at the end of the process. Everything's been approved. We produce a green background sheet that has some standard language on it, and then gets into the date it was issued, who it was issued to, what use this was, and what part of the property or building you're being approved for. This frame was done by the owner. We don't provide the frame for you, but we'll get you the certificate. So now I've got my certificate. What exactly do I do with this thing? City code does require you to post it. There are some uses where that's not feasible. Generally, maybe a transmission tower, an outdoor storage use that you really don't have a building there or something. We don't ask you that you put it on the fence. It should be at an office somewhere related to that. So fire inspectors will look for that. Other people may be looking for that occupancy. The general ordinance is posted somewhere in the building. You'll see them sometimes behind the counter. You walk into a restaurant, whatever. They've got a lot of different placards up there and notices. One of them is often the occupancy certificate. Note that we don't require occupancies for 1- and 2-family dwellings, again, with the exception of some of those special uses. So for your home, if you move out, we don't require a formal occupancy. There are communities that do. Milwaukee has not been one of them. So. And that extends to if you build a new home, you find a piece of land, I want to build a new one-family, two-family. The city has not required an occupancy certificate in those scenarios. You just get your inspections based on your permits. They will finalize those permits for you, and you should be good to go. A couple examples of some of the ones that have been issued. This was for the new Bucks Arena, the Fiserv Forum. This is a portion of it. Same information. They had partial occupancies on the way through to get them going on places in it, but somewhere in that facility should be this certificate posted on the wall. This was one a couple years ago Milwaukee MAKERSPACE had done. They created their own unique frame. You can frame it however you want. Just thought that one had some nice flair to it. So now we get into, well, we know about an occupancy certificate. Who exactly needs one? City code gets very specific, as it usually does. Says it's unlawful to occupy or use or offer to occupy or use any building now existing, hereafter erected, unless or until a certificate has been issued by the commissioner. And it gets into that language again about for each use stated in the code, and it extends to things like commercial farming enterprises, other regulations of this code. Commercial farming is a more recent addition to our zoning codes, which is why I think it got called out in that section. And each time there's a change in the operator or a tenant of a non-residential premise, this is probably the most common one we run into. Somebody's going to take over a business location, a tenant suite, whatever it may be. So the bulk of our applications would be for a new operator within an existing space. Sometimes you'll have uses that tying into this use table and talking about a new certificate for each use. We do have plenty of multiple use type of occupancies. One example is a motor vehicle dealership. You've got defined uses of motor vehicle sales, you've got motor vehicle service, and motor vehicle body work, which are all different categories in that zoning code. We're not going to issue a different certificate, but what we do in those cases is we classify each of those and put it in the description that Joe's car dealership with sales, service, and whatever other functions they may be. Churches often have multiple uses within them. We've got the traditional assembly space. Many of them have a school associated with the church, and they also get into other community serving functions such as food pantries and those type of activities. Restaurants. Now, a restaurant often has a drive-through facility. You wouldn't think of a drive-through facility necessarily as a use, but the city has defined it as a separate use. So we want to make sure that that's identified as part of the application process. And if you get a new building, this is kind of another one of those nuances. There's one particular accessory use that's brought into the main use table, which is accessory parking lots. You have something that parking is on my site for my building. There's rules that apply to that where in some instances they've brought some design standards in saying we don't want the parking in front of the building. Most of our older commercial areas, the storefronts were all the way up front. If you want to put the parking in front of the building in those areas, you may be able to do that, but it's a board of zoning process on that. So a couple of twists on it that don't come up that often, but good things to be aware of. This is one of those dealerships that has multiple uses in it. They have different sales rooms. They have service functions, surface bays. This particular one is operated by one group. They have multiple brands. They have Audi, they have BMW, other functions like that. So do I need a different occupancy for each of my brands? No, that's not the case. It's really occupancy is tied to whoever's operating. If they have one LLC, one organization operating the whole thing, one occupancy will suffice. If they had different ownership structures, then that triggers separate occupancies on that. So kind of boiling it down a bit, when you establish your business, your church, your agency, your school in a new or existing building, you need a certificate of occupancy before you open your doors. They're also required for some things that you might not be aware of, such as parking lots, outdoor uses. I have an outdoor storage lot. Commercial storage buildings, so I'm putting up a new large shed behind my factory or my store or something like that. That requires an occupancy when it's all said and done. And then again, on 1 and 2 family homes, we're not requiring it unless it's been declared unfit for habitation and been vacant for some length of time, might have orders to fix. We don't want somebody getting in there and starting up again while the plumbing's not working, et cetera. And those small uses that are wrapped within that code, the CBRF, the adult family homes. So all through that, we've figured out when we need that. Why exactly do I need it? Comes down to basically showing compliance with zoning and building code. We've discussed zoning a bit, the regulations that are in place, the building code impact on it. Really, the certificate just is your proof that I'm good to go. This thing meets those rules. There's specific language to that effect in there. When exactly do I need the certificate? Before you begin operating your business or enterprise. If you've constructed a new building or addition, at the end of that process, you'll need a certificate. If you're moving your business into a new space or a new building or expanding your business beyond the area you occupy currently. So if I have the first floor of this building and I'm going to bring my function up to the second floor where I was not in control or operating within that space, you need to revise your occupancy to reflect that. Outdoor storage lots and outdoor functions often are the ones that are of main concern on that. They start acquiring adjacent property, wanting to move the scrapping operation, the storage operation, whatever it may be. So just know that if you change your plan, basically, you need to come back and amend your occupancy on that. If you change the name of your business or when the operator of the business changes, so if someone sells to somebody else, but they're going to operate the business the same way, the new owner needs it. If I just decide to change the actual name on the outside, but I'm still the owner, still the same function, there's a simplified name change occupancy that captures that. If you have a special approval, a zoning permit basically through our Board of Zoning Appeals or through a plan development, they will put expiration dates on those. Lots and lots of daycares have sprouted up in the city. They generally most of them have to go through the Board of Zoning for a special use permit. They will grant those 1 year, 3 year, 5 year approvals, sometimes longer. At the end of that time period, they're going to send a letter out saying your approval has expired, which makes your occupancy null and void. So you have to start the process again with an occupancy application, get a new certificate, and renew that zoning approval that's associated with it. And again, the unfit for habitation type of scenario out there. This is an example of new construction at the end of this project. This Miller Park's a little unique because it's state land, but as they develop this thing, they're going to plan ahead and coordinate application for an occupancy to make sure they can open before that first ball game of the year. Moving to a new location, a new store coming soon. We're all pretty familiar with that scenario. The name change, a good local example was Altera selling their naming rights and becoming Colectivo. So each of their locations should add an updated occupancy to reflect that. This one can get a little interesting if you have a business that has other licenses. Restaurants typically have to have a food license. Taverns, those type of things have a liquor license. And you need to coordinate whatever is put on those other applications with what's going to be on in your occupancy. So if you operate with an LLC, you want to make sure that exact description is also on your occupancy here, and it can extend to changing basically your branding on it. So just be aware if you have some of those that have multiple licenses, multiple approvals, that there's some coordination involved on those. This is obviously uninhabitable, so if somebody was able to come in and salvage this, restore it, there'd be permits required for that. At the end of the process, there'd be that occupancy to reflect that this thing now meets building code, now meets our zoning ordinances, and get it back to a functioning state. So. Circumstances do arise when people wonder, can I get in there before I have an occupancy? Those are those couple that we discussed early on, the temporary occupancy permit and a conditional occupancy certificate. They're similar but different. One of them deals with basically building code. So if I have a temporary situation that I'm going to ask for, if I'm building the new arena for the Bucks and we're complete to the point that we're just finishing up some measures in there that are not deemed to be a special life safety hazard of some sort, we can give some approvals through the inspection process, through the commissioner's office, to get you established functioning for a portion of the building while you finish up others. It's fairly common in some of the multifamily buildings back, especially when it was condos, that they would look for approval on the common use spaces, the parking lots, maybe a floor or two that were ready to go while some upper floors were being worked on. We've also had somewhere large restaurants, they're going to bring their staff in and do their training ahead of time. Not quite a soft opening, but let's get people familiar with this. And really to have those functions going on, you need an occupancy. Well, might not be fully ready, so we'll give you a temporary out there to do that type of training work. Again, this goes through the commissioner's office over at Neighborhood Services. They'll take a look based on inspector feedback as to the status of the building and either deny or approve that for you. Conditional occupancy works in somewhat of a similar manner. This comes into play when you have some other agencies, typically Board of Zoning Appeals. So if you've been told that I have to go through a special use process, that takes some time. If this thing is going smoothly, you've completed your application, the building meets code, you don't have building code situations to deal with, violations out there. Now, it's just a timing matter. And if the aldermanic office supports it as a representative of the neighborhood, they can consider and potentially grant approval to get in there before that hearing date. That might still be a month out. So it's a nice tool to have out there. It does require some effort, requires support of the neighborhood through the alderman's office, and that's issued through the development center. You have to have everything working through the occupancy process, the building inspections done, and any repairs completed, but it's a mechanism we can offer to save you some time. So all that said and done, we're up to the point where, okay, I know I need one. How do I get one of these certificates? There's applications that can be made either online, or you can come and do these in person. Our land management system is out there. It needs some refinement yet, but we have a tool out there to create an occupancy application. That application is not automatically processed. It goes to somebody like Alex to review that application. It does require, I believe, that you create a user account like most other websites, name and password. Complete the information that's asked for. Anything extra that you can provide to help me or Alex or my coworkers understand what you're trying to do at that site, such as a site plan or a plan of operation, a description that kind of tells us exactly what type of business you're going to have. It's helpful. You can attach those kind of documentation to that record. It'll all be there for us to take a look at. So, or if you come in person, the development center, if you're not aware, is over at the 809 North Broadway building to the east of City Hall here. We're on the first floor. We're open Monday through Friday, 8 to 4. You can come in person. It's a as you show up type of first come, first served basis. But you can come meet with a plan reviewer, submit your application in person. It can be helpful if you have something that has some complexity to it. If you have other approval processes, we can steer you through that process in person. So. To expedite this review process, information is key. Even as simple as knowing the address of the site. We've had people confused. They weren't sure it wasn't on the building. The owner wasn't being clear. As much as you can do to kind of define where is this business going to be, where in the building is it going to be? First floor east, tenant space 6, whatever it may be. Keep in mind that we have to have this clear so that for record purposes, if we're researching this 5 years down the line, we know, okay, this business was in this location and it can continue that way, or no, we never have any record of one being established. It'll help you out long term on that. Square footage can be helpful. That's mainly a driver of the fees if inspections are required, but know how much space you're leasing, for instance. We should know how the space was last used, so if you're not the owner of the building, if you can talk to the landlord, the owner, and find out what was in there last, how long has it been sitting since that person moved out. That's very helpful information. There are times when, if you have a strip mall, we need to know what else is operating in that space, or if it's one open space, what other type of uses. So as much information you can provide to us to key us in as to what's this building all about, what's this site all about. It's much appreciated. If you do have other applications pending, licenses, whether it's a school application, whether it's daycare, the community living arrangements, the group homes, those type of things, some of these we require that you make that application first, bring that to us so that we are not sending you down a different path and calling you a group home when you should be a group foster home. So there are times the alcoholic beverage license, we need to match those up, so we're going to ask you to provide a copy of that. If you've made it through some of these other approvals, whether it's at the state, BOZA, it never hurts to bring that evidence along or attach it to a record. We ask if you're going to remodel the space. Most people, when they come in, they may be just accepting it as is. There may be times when you want to make some improvements out there. The reason we ask that is we want to just help you understand what other permits you might need. If you know you're going to put up a couple of walls and create a new toilet room or something, we can step you through the process to go through to obtain those type of permits, because the last thing we want is for you to get out there with the occupancy, you've done some work, and the inspector stops everything and says, nope, you need a permit at this point. So just trying to help you through the various processes on it. Site and landscaping plans are probably getting to be a little more key than they had been. Our bike ordinance was revised in the last year, I believe, and has much more stringent requirements that apply to provision of bike spaces, even when you change an operator of a space at times. So if I'm coming in and taking over a business that's going, there may be times when I have to prove that I have so many bike spaces available. Now, they can be spaces out on the sidewalk with a hoop. They can be, there's different ways of complying with that. But bike spacing has become bike parking has become a much greater part of this whole thing. So owners often have site plans. Parking is a concern for motor vehicles too. How many spaces are available? Do you have street spaces available out front? The reason we're asking all that is primarily for parking needs on it. And then a concise plan of operation. Retail sales of shoes is a pretty simple one. You don't have to work up a whole plan of operation on that. But if you have something that's maybe not, I'll say in the gray areas, is unique, we seem to be getting a lot of those these days. If you can put in writing what you plan to do in that space, what activities are going to take place, I'll show you a link to a forum that kind of steps you through what should be on a plan of operation. So it's just a tool to inform us of what you have in mind with your business. You've been developing this for a long time, short time. You have a pretty good idea. There's times, though, that we need something in writing to clarify that. So. As I mentioned, the BOZA website is one link. I believe this will be available on the website, right, so people can access some of this information. You can get into what is proper for a site plan, perhaps a floor plan, a plan of operation. Our development center link also has some information sheets on the occupancy process that'll be helpful for you. What happens once I present all that information? You meet with that plan examiner, or the plan examiner will take a look at your file out there, try and classify it from a use standpoint against both building and zoning. We've got to take a look at the parking requirements in the code. Sometimes you run into floodplain situations if the property's in a floodplain. Other uses require coordination with other agencies. So we're going to look for that type of information, make sure that's in place, the daycares, the taverns, the restaurants. Uses in a floodplain, thankfully, occurs very rarely. Here you can see this isn't necessarily a floodplain in the valley on this canal, but we have some outdoor storage. We have a bunch of vehicles stored. There are regulations through DNR and FEMA that limit what you can do in these areas to prevent things like this from happening if we get a flood event. So outdoor storage in particular, we don't want hazardous materials that might wash down the floodway. We don't want things that are going to hit a bridge and obstruct and create even a worse situation. This can be a little tricky. There's not too many areas. There's a couple up by Miller Valley where some buildings are out there that we've had it become a problem that somebody wanted to come in and use the space in a way that wouldn't work. So. We go back to how is this used. The plan reviewers comparing it against which category you fall into. There's also this thing that's akin to grandfathering, what we call a continuing non-conforming use. That's where we need evidence of what was out there previously, how long it's been since they discontinued. So if you have something that wouldn't be permitted in those tables today, if it was established in 1953, before the rules that were that way, you can continue that kind of thing as this continuous non-conforming use, but we need to be able to document that. And note that you can apply for these things, but we cannot actually grant you that certificate until both the zoning and building code aspects are met. So, the building code portion, there are times we might ask you for more information if you have special hazards in there, like hazardous materials. How many of this, how many gallons of this paint thinner, something that drives the building code into, are you handling this property properly or not? Generally, if you're coming in and the building's going to be used the same way, you're not going to run into much from a, do I need to put a sprinkler system in? Well, not if you're going office to office typically, but if you're going retail to something that has upholstered furniture, which has a special fire hazard, there are triggers in there sometimes that'll catch you. So the plan examiner will work with you on that, explain that for you. If you change the use to something that has special rules to it, such as you go over a threshold for capacity that might trigger sprinklering. You go from a small cafe that's 40-some people up to a club that somehow is 100 and some people. There can be triggers that say that you have to provide compliance with that. we can give you some basic information on it, but ultimately we may have to ask you to retain an architect or engineer to go out to the site, do that code analysis, bring it back to us so we can see if it's going to make it work or what steps you might have to take, what kind of improvements you might have to take on it. And then that tags into inspections. Our inspection staff goes out on change of occupancy type of application. These were 2 grand old houses that have long been offices and others. This is a little tricky today. The rules have gotten more stringent on this, but we have situations like this all over the city. This is that change of occupancy, how the building's being used. Those trigger some inspections out there from a plumbing, electrical, elevator, construction inspector. They're looking for basic code compliance from the building code. There are some, if it's continuing, that don't require inspections. We will let you know what that process is all about, and you can also access more information on that process at the website. Just about everything you do with the city has fees to it. Fees for the no inspection type of things are generally in the $50 to $75 range for the application. If inspections are required, it starts at $75. It can go up to about $425 for a large facility. More often, it's about a little bit above $200. If you have to go through other agencies, licensing, the Board of Zoning, they have their own fee structures and application requirements. If you want to do that business in your home, codes do allow some of that. We have a separate form and process and agency that review that. There's a home occupation statement out there that goes through our fire inspection area, what they call commercial code enforcement. There's a fee that's charged on that, an application available. Some of the scrap dealers are a good example. They'll drive around in a pickup truck, pick up scrap that's out there, appliances, take it to the dump. They have to have a home occupation statement because most of them work out of their house. And what the inspectors are looking for on that is that they don't take the goods back to the house and create a junkyard in the backyard, and they've got a place to park the truck that's legal, those type of things. Home occupations are limited as to how many customers you could have coming there, how many other employees. It's really intended for doing a business in your home and not turning the whole home into an office. Once I make it through all this, how do I get my approved certificate? Once your inspections have been done if needed, they say it generally takes about 3 working days to get that occupancy issued. We'll mail it out to you unless we hear otherwise. They also put a copy of that into that online. If you want the online route, you can access it in that online record. You can also give us a call. Come on in and pick up the certificate if you really want to have it today as opposed to Thursday. And we'll get that to you. So congratulations, you made it. Got your new venture going. Some of the other links that are out there, I can show you examples of this. I think we'll leave some time for questions. So again, this will be available for you. There's a Smart Start tool out there, or Start Smart, that has been developed to kind of ask you a series of questions and direct you to the right approvals that you need for a process for a business. Licensing, whatever else. The zoning code is available online. You can find out the zoning of an address. If you're looking at a place down the block as possibly a leasing point, you can pull up the zoning that's available there. You can look at the zoning code uses. We have those information sheets out there. We also answer our phones. You can talk to somebody in person. It may be a callback situation. They'll take a message if nobody's available. But we will get back to you to discuss some of these issues. And we also have an email link that's out there. That's everything I had at this point. So with that, we'll open it up. If you have any questions, any comments, any concerns on this, happy to respond to those. Yes?
So it sounds like ultimately the responsibility for getting the certificate of occupancy falls on the tenant, not necessarily the landlord or
That is correct. I would say as an owner, though, I would take the responsibility of monitoring that. So.
And then so I manage a multi-tenant commercial office building.
Okay.
And I do know that when a space goes vacant, then we get another tenant, we have to get a new certificate of occupancy.
Mm-hmm.
But on occasion, we'll leave a space vacant for a while, take a look at it and say, maybe if we tear down a couple of walls, move a kitchen, we'll do some cleanup work.
Sure.
We go through the necessary permits, get the inspections, and then we get like mixed reviews on whether or not we need to get an occupancy certificate. Which I don't understand why we would, because it's not being occupied, and then when it will be occupied, we'll get one.
So at the completion of that project they're asking for, you run into it where at times they're asking for the occupancy at that point?
Right, but there's no one occupying it. We're just kind of cleaning it up to make it more attractive for a potential occupant.
Right. I can see where that can happen as the owner to show that you have this thing established now as a legal space so that when your tenant does come in, if it happens to be a couple of years or something before somebody actually comes into that, I think that would be the main concern. If it was going to be in short order, I think putting it on the tenant if the tenant is known. So it's a matter of, do we know what use is going to be in there? Have you designed it a certain way? And I think that's going to stay at one of those kind of judgment call type of situations. I don't know if I have a direct, yeah, it is. Yes?
Where will we find the information in regards to a home being habitable and
So-
a certificate of occupancy?
So what you would see is if you go to the property data site that's out there or to our land management system, what you'd be seeing would be enforcement cases that are out there, orders that are out there. So our residential code enforcement staff would get involved, or potentially our condemnation section where it's very severe and they're going to put a raise order on this thing, hoping that it gets fixed instead of torn down. But you'd be looking for those kind of orders that would say that you need to repair 2 pages worth of violations out there. I think I had, let's see, a couple of links that might work for you on this. This thing cooperates. If you go right to the city's main page, there's this property data screen, which might be a good starting point. And it's Milwaukee, city.milwaukee.gov. You can get into this, it takes you to this My Milwaukee Home, which will have links to some of the other areas that are out there. The land management system will have a list of records associated with an address, and some of those records would be violations that are out there. And I think in the worst case, you could always give us a call on that, but with those couple of tools, this land management system, again, this is our development center site. And you don't have to be a registered user to just search information in this system. So I can go into one if I want to look up property information. You can start by entering the address, and it'll show you records that are associated with it. And there should be, I think there are ORD records that would be orders that have been issued against the property. And you can get detail within that. So.
And a person is going to occupy the premises that needs a certificate. How do they know what work needs to be done first in order for it to be lived?
In this situation, that order should give you a good guide on that. So they're going to cite that, the defective plumbing in the second story and those type of things. And then if the inspection's required, the inspectors will also reiterate those type of things. They'll come out, well, you got quite a few things to take care of, and give you a list of the items that need to be brought into compliance. Yes, sir.
I wanted to follow up to her question about smaller projects like single family. So you don't have to go through that whole process with land examiners and all that. You know what the orders are, you hold permits, you get all that done, and permits or inspections are passed, then you're pretty much done, or you don't have to go.
If you just have a property that's in need of repair and has some orders on it, the order would specify whether you need an occupancy. So if there's some special concern they have, one of the conditions of that repair order would be obtain an occupancy certificate. Otherwise, it's generally get the repair work done, get it done in a fairly timely fashion, and get permits as needed for that type of work, electrical permits, plumbing permits, whatever it may be. But the occupancy usually would not come into play on that.
But in the cases where, say, it's like about to be raised, has a bunch of issues, it needs the occupancy permit, then you do have to go through, and if it's
Right.
a single family place,
Right.
you have to go through and fill out
Correct.
occupancy to happen.
Right. In that case, we're not changing the use necessarily, so the zoning part would be very simple.
Right.
It'd be just a matter of getting the inspection process done.
Okay.
Does that answer your question on that one?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Are you able to obtain an occupancy permit with 2 names, so one owner, 2 business names?
Can you give me an example on that
Sure.
exactly?
One part would be for-profit, the other is not-for-profit. It's a training aspect to it, and then sort of on-the-job training opportunity or work.
We have a lot of situations that are the legal entity doing business as something else. As far as if it's the same ownership operating under two names, I don't know that it'd get, one way to do that would be get one occupancy for the whole thing and a separate kind of no inspection depending on the use to cover the portion that the second business name is operating under. But I don't know that there's anything that would restrict necessarily Jeff's Legal LLC doing business as, you know, two different naming functions, as long as the essence of the building use is still captured on there.
Okay. Two separate activities.
Right, I think
It's
if you had a,
nonprofit, that may have zoning implications.
yeah, that would be the tricky part.
Okay.
I think if we had something that tripped into one of those special use type of categories, social service function or something like that, then we're probably going to look for separate certificates on it just to record that properly. In the back? Yep.
Is there a time component with one or two families that being vacant that would trigger the occupancy?
They set it at 6 months. So if there's orders and it's been vacant for more than 6 months, that's what's in the code at this point. So, and we're here. Oh, okay. Anyone else? Yes.
So, is there a difference between essential repair verification form and the owner occupancy certificate? Like, are you able to live in a property with the essential repair verification form filled out? Is it still?
That I'd have to defer on. I don't get involved in those. I don't know, do you remember?
I don't know if they're still doing that or not.
We could put you in touch with the right section to get an answer on that one. So, sorry about that. Way in the back, did you?
Oh, no.
No? Okay.
Did
Yes,
you say
sir.
for the 1 and 2 families that could be noted on here whether occupancy permit is required?
The orders typically do, with the exception that 6-month time frame that the other gentleman asked about. So if you're running into that 6 months, that's what the code language says, is if it has orders and it's been more than 6 months.
By default,
Right.
occupancy is required.
If there was something shorter than that, but there was a serious enough concern, they might cite it on the order that you need to get that occupancy. So. Questions? Anyone else? Yes, sir.
Say a tenant has an occupancy permit and a same tax key. There's also a vacant building that's been vacant over 6 months. Is the building, is it still subject to the vacant building?
As far as the vacant building registration that was out there?
Yeah, because, and it's the same tax key.
I don't believe so, if it's under the same control, but that's another one I don't want to clarify for you, just because it's handled by a different section of our department. Again, I can get you a contact person to get in touch with on that, or if you had an email on that, I can get that over to you. But from our standpoint, the vacancy would be, in that scenario, if you wanted to keep occupying and come in for a new occupancy in the building that's been occupied, the vacancy of that one shouldn't trigger it unless you wanted to start using that building. But as far as the vacant building rules and program, I'd have to clarify that for you. Okay. Anyone else? All right. Well, thank you for attending today. Appreciate your time. And hopefully it was useful information for you.
Yeah.